Hello and welcome to the webinar. This is a manufacturing public policy webinar. This says monthly. I guess it's monthly now. It used to be more frequent than that. So I started to say biweekly. Anyway, monthly webinar update on what is going on here in Washington that impacts manufacturers across the country. I'm Caitlin Sickles with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. On the webinar today, Paul Nathanson, also with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, and Omar Nashashibi with Inside Beltway. This webinar is a production of the National Tooling and Machining Association and the Precision Metal Forming Association. You will be able to find a copy of this PowerPoint as well as a recording of the webinar on onevoiceinfo.org and also on the PMA YouTube channel. Look to both NTMA and PMA for more information about these One Voice webinars and other One Voice content. We are coming to you on an interesting and exciting week for folks who are members of One Voice. We have just concluded our annual One Voice fly-in here in DC, where members of NTMA and PMA were on the ground here in Washington talking to their elected officials about the impact of tax, trade, tariff, workforce development policies, all of the above on manufacturers. So lots of thanks to One Voice members who participated in that. We will be bringing you more updates on those issues in this webinar. You can see all of the content included in this deck. You'll be pleased to know we won't be reading you every single piece of information, but all the information is included in this deck if you want to get it and read it later. If you have questions during the webinar, recommend that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, not the chat feature, the Q&A feature. That enables us to see your questions and respond to as many as we can during the session. I am going to now turn it over to Omar, who will walk us through what is going on here in DC. I think Omar is going to start with Congress, where there is still much going on to try to resolve the ongoing budget debate, try to get a deal there. Omar, let me go to you to give manufacturers the latest. There are even changes from the people who were here just a day ago. So I'll go to you.
Oh my gosh, Caitlin, there were changes just from a few minutes ago with regards to the president's budget and everything else that has been coming up. So as I'm texting with Paul in real time, yes, everything is changing pretty quickly. And again, thank you for that shout out, Caitlin, to everyone who did come to Washington, D.C. for that event this week. We had 8 members of Congress show up to our reception. We had the House Majority Whip also attend our meeting and give us an update, the latest with taxes. We had a group go over to the White House, so it was definitely a full week out there for our team. Speaking of the White House, President Trump did put out his budget request this morning, and that came in at $1.7 trillion. Excuse me, I shouldn't say B, $1.7 trillion budget request that came out this morning. What that is a PBR. A president's budget request is just that. It is a request that goes up to Capitol Hill. Well, we used to have a saying around town, the president proposes and Congress disposes. This is not binding. All the scrolls that you'll see across your news clips about him cutting these funds and increasing these funds does not have the authority to do that. That would take act of Congress on there. That's why we put in here that the budget is a request. It's not an actual funding for programs, but it does give you an idea of the president's priorities as he looks to move forward in the FY26 process, which we are still now just beginning to go underway. As always, if you do have questions as we go through this, please feel free to type them in. We'll try to incorporate them as we go with a lot that's happening here. On the reconciliation process, we'll give you a few updates based on what we heard from our meetings up on Capitol Hill this week and where they stand right now. As a reminder, what they're looking at in the reconciliation process is this is how they're going to be moving the issues of taxes. Reconciliation is a process that allows lawmakers in the Senate to not have to use members of the other party and to avoid having to get to 60 votes and to be able to get through with just a simple majority. So what the House and Senate have done is they've set up a process. The process is a little bit different. The House is looking to cut somewhere between $1.5 and $2 trillion. The Senate is proposing to cut somewhere about $4 billion So those are going to be a little bit different. And you'll note the president's budget request is skinny. It's a $1.7 trillion request is what he's requesting now. Normally it comes up much higher. That's why we call it a skinny budget that just came out. Republicans in reconciliation are just going to use a single party process. It's going to include taxes, border, defense, a whole host of issues. And they started this week in the House with the committees starting to put together the parts of the bill. Some committees are going to be cutting, some committees are going to be raising spending, and that leaves the tax writers in the end to bring this all together. The tax writers have been meeting this week. There should be another meeting on Monday that comes up as well when we look at reconciliation and the tax process here. They were supposed to move next week in the Ways and Means Committee. That seems unlikely. As a refresher for everyone, if Congress does not act by the end of this year, then taxes will go up on individuals and business owners. Right now, under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, you have a number of provisions that have already expired or will begin to continue to do so. We have bonus depreciation has fallen to 40% from 100%. We have R&D, you no longer can expense it, you have to amortize it and pay taxes on capital on it as well. Your 199A pass-through for you small businesses are going to disappear. That pay at the individual rate is going away at the end of the year as well. All of these go away if Congress does not act in the coming months. What we're hearing based on our meetings is that lawmakers in the House are still trying to move their bill by Memorial Day. That's going to be tight if this coming week we don't get more of the committees to mark up. The Ways and Means tax writers will go last as they try to figure out how much money they've got to maneuver with. We were told this week that it's unlikely that we're going to see all these provisions made permanent moving forward. The House is looking to make a number of them temporary, and then we'll see what the Senate can bring them up. So the timing of taxes, they are looking at taking your R&D expensing and making you whole on that, but retroactive to January of 2025, would not go further beyond that. So R&D is on the table. Bonus depreciation back to 100% and 163J are all on the table. For the House, we heard 10-year extension from the House side. It might be permanent for one or two of those, with the idea that the Senate will backfill it. There's also discussions about making changes to the 199A to make additional companies eligible by removing some of the net operating loss and the deficit requirements on there and making it more generous for businesses. On the Senate side, we were told that they are still discussing with the White House a potential manufacturing tax rate or some kind of discussion that came already out there. And so that's where we are right now on taxes and where they see things might end up going in the coming months on that. And I think that what you're going to see is that the House is going to keep pushing forward in the coming weeks. I think there is a decent chance they get their bill done by Memorial Day, but then we're going to see what it gets slowed down over on the Senate side, as not everything's going to get made permanent and there's going to be not much room to maneuver. In the end, we believe the timeline on this is likely in the August, maybe the end of July timeframe, because I believe that what we're hearing basically is that they're going to add on the budget deficit. So right now the US is going to reach its borrowing limit soon, and upon doing so, run out of cash. And that therefore we're going to have to extend or raise that limit. Republicans don't want to deal with Democrats, so they're going to insert language in this reconciliation bill, and that's why the timing of that is important. We're going to run out of our spending limit here in the next coming months or so. So taxes, watch this space closely. Hopefully we'll have a better update when we get through the month of May, as that we really need more progress from the House. Tax writers have started. The pen to paper is already happening. They're moving pretty quickly. Speaking of moving quickly, a lot of work on the administration side. We want to stay with one area of concern for our members over the last week in April. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST over at the Commerce Department, took some actions in early April to begin canceling some contracts and awards. We have a number of our members that use MEPs. They're very critical in certain parts of the country, and they're effective in certain processes that they do. And the NIST, as part of the Department of Commerce, began canceling some of those awards effective April 1st for a handful of them, as you can see across the country. And then after an outcry, reinstated them. You'll see here, this top batch were among those that were canceled. The next ones in lines that potentially could be canceled are here on July 1st. We've heard that Colorado and a few others may already starting to see shut their doors. The federal government provides It's not a lot of money. It's $174 million. I think somewhere in that range is what we're talking about, which is a rounding error for almost every agency in the government. And therefore, this is unfortunate that NIST is doing it and they're getting some pushback from the Hill. But if you are using a manufacturing extension partnership program, just note from a lobbying standpoint, both our associations are working on those and coordinating with the MEP National Group, as well as talking to Hill members as we did during the fly-in on that as well. Along those lines, the apprenticeship executive order came out from the president recently, and this executive order seeks to, as you see here, consolidate and streamline some of the fragmented federal workforce development programs, as due to there are just so many that are out there across a number of different requirements now that the Inflation Reduction Act has them as well. One thing that I did want to maybe go back to, Paul, if you don't mind jumping in on the MEPs quickly, because I did want to bring you in on some of the other highlights of stuff that you're doing there.
Yeah, so on the MEP, this is Paul from Policy Resolution Group. Just we need to make this. Those who are involved in MEPs, we're going to make immediate effort to help remind members of Congress and others about the importance of these programs. Some of you have reached out to me, willing to participate in our media efforts. If you're a PMA or NTMA member and you want to participate, just reach out to us. Our contact information is at the end. And I know Omar started to talk about apprenticeships. We also like to advertise to the media so that they can get to their members of Congress and others the great things you're doing on apprenticeships, as Omar is going to talk about, obviously, the policy issues involved in it. Thanks, Omar.
No, but thank you for that, Paul. Not to bring it too much lobbying into this, but as part of our meeting at the White House, we did discuss with them how we can support their efforts to promote apprenticeships and careers in manufacturing, and possibly putting together a list of quotes and other areas of support from actual owners to promote this executive order and some of the work that the White House is doing in this space as well. As we know, though, on this action, it's only on registered apprenticeship programs. It's not promoting those that become customized and are non-registered, and it's understandable to an extent, but we did hope to see some flexibility in there to allow for some resources for those that aren't going to be registered with the federal government or state level. But you'll know here that they do try to integrate some of those systems and realign those critical workforce needs with in-demand skills. That language has been around for a number of years, but they are looking to coordinate further with companies and with industries here in their directive that they put out to the agencies to move forward over the next several months when they put together their plan on here. They also are looking to get rid of some of those ineffective programs that are out there and identifying which ones can be reformed or eliminated, but then also identify alternative credentials and assessments to the 4-year college degree that can be mapped to the specific skill needs of prospective employers. That one is critical if they are able to work on that and make some substantive changes to just the way that the education system is graded itself, and not just by sending individuals off to college, but also for career preparedness and looking at. So there's certainly some opportunities here, and we'll continue to work with the administration as they look to reach their goal of surpassing 1 million new active apprentices. My expectation is that the White House is going to come out and ask for pledges from the manufacturing community to increase the apprenticeships that are available, and we'll continue to move forward and work with them as well. Note it does also mention Perkins and CTE on here. I did neglect to mention that in their markup this week for the House Education and Workforce Committee on the reconciliation package, they do have the Jobs Act language in there. For those of you that I see some names that know what that means on here, that's the legislation on which we've been lobbying since 2014-15 that would shorten the amount of hours rather needed for Pell Grants to make it a lot more manageable and accessible for individuals. So that language is already in there, and we think that's hopefully going to stick, and we're just working on that forever. A few other things on the regulatory side, on the positive manufacturing. For those of you that have been in touch with the Small Business Administrator recently, former Senator Kelly Loeffler from Georgia, she's been traveling the country, meeting with a number of groups, including a few of our manufacturers. They're really trying to change how that organization works, and it's not just a vehicle for SBA loans, is I think what they're trying to do with it. They're looking at now grants for manufacturing, and you can see here an opportunity, 1.1 million, not a lot of dollars, but at least shows the intent for the different types of programs that they're trying to fund here to support small businesses, for the SBA's Empower to Grow program, that's out there, and some of the other issues, be in business for 3+ years, demonstrate as a capacity to provide hands-on manufacturing related training and technical assistance to small business concerns. So it could be a nonprofit or a for-profit entity. It could be a trade association. So there's opportunities in here as well. There'll be a webinar coming up to explain this next week for those that have some interest. We threw in 3 DoD slides. So for you that are in the defense supply chain, please take note of these next 3, as I think they're going to set the pathway for where we go with this administration in the defense industrial base procurement space. The DoD has received, rather, the White House put out an executive order, and that EO and that memorandum directed the Department of Defense to update their acquisition process. For those that want more detail, please reach out to us. Laura, our head of research and in our shop, did put out a memo to clients on this that's of interest. The acquisition, they're doing a couple of things here, and I'm leaving out the workforce. They're looking at reforming the contracting acquisition workforce, and they want to report back within 120 days. But focusing on this area, within 60 days of April the 9th, the DoD has to report back and how they're going to utilize existing authorities to expedite the acquisition throughout the DoD, including a first preference for commercial solutions and general preference for the other transactions authority, and then the rapid capabilities office policies. Essentially, they're trying to expedite and move these things a lot more quickly through the acquisition process there. They're also within 90 days. They want to see a comprehensive review of all major defense acquisition programs and any programs that are more than 15% behind schedule or 15% over cost based on the current program that's out there. They're going to be up for additional scrutiny, and expect this to proceed rather quickly and efficiently, as they might highlight a certain amount of the waste and then seek to reprogram some of the dollars to some of their additional priorities. Those are in the Army space. Please click on the link down below. This is a multi-page memo that the SecDef put out to the service just 2 days ago, Wednesday, yeah. And you'll notice here, I'm not going to go through this, but it goes through some of the priorities that SecDef wants to see for the Army. And if you are any of those platforms or programs or would like to be, this is basically your guide to start looking at conversations with the primes. On the left sides are opportunities. On the right sides are the risks that you want to mitigate and be aware of as they move forward. Now, truly jumping into the regulatory aspect of this, we will talk about the regulatory issue and the portion of where they're going. The portal is open. This is the portal that the president said if they like what you're doing, they might name the deregulatory action after you. But this is open, and this is an opportunity to provide a voice, especially for small businesses, for ineffective regulations. And this is up and running there as well. Speaking of ineffective regulations, coming up on June the 16th, this OSHA is going to hold a public hearing. I believe it'll run into 2 days, more than just one. Those that are interested in participating and testifying, you are required to file by today if that's something that you want to do. OSHA's heat proposed rules, we mentioned under the Biden administration, would have a number of requirements on industry, including when the heat index reaches or exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit and then goes up to the high heat trigger at 90 degrees, where they would require every 2 hours, a 15-minute work break. They're looking at cold water, potentially at 60 degrees being put forward, and a number of other things that are out there. We're hearing we go back and forth. Again, lobbying side here, we're trying to debate whether or not we should move forward with a rule from OSHA on heat or some kind of an action in this space, because you have an opportunity of an administration that might allow more flexibility for industries that use heat, because you're already starting to see an increased patchwork among the states there as well. So there is potentially some push to see, and they may not do a rule. We'll see where they go back and forth, but know where that comes up. Department of Labor did release their 300A injury and illness data partially. So if you pull up, it comes out in an Excel spreadsheet. You can sort it by NAICS codes, and also the names are in there as they always are, going back to the Obama era. But they are going to go through the additional batch and seemingly may go through it and get rid of some information, just scrubbing it. You can see from this press release, and put more out there. So this is what happens when you're putting your electronic filings every March. This is where the data ends up going. This is actually a pretty quick turnaround for a Trump administration to release some of that information already. This one just happened yesterday. You folks that have an independent contractor, the guidance has been reversed. If you'll recall, this has been going on since Obama, then Trump reversed it, then goes back to the Biden administration, and now here we are with Trump again. And this deals with Wage and Hour Division has issued It's not a new rule. They're not entirely reversing because there's federal court challenges that have been ongoing that some of our coalition partners have been involved here. But what the government is doing is they're saying that they're not going to enforce the Biden era independent contractor standard. And that's what the directive is they put out through the field assistance bulletin that was put out. So the guidance does not change existing regulations, but reflects how department is allocating enforcement resources during the review of the 2024 rule. So again, if you have independent contractors, please discuss with your labor council, as this could be significant to your shops. We've got a few more. I know folks are anxious to get to trade. Promise we'll get there. Just a few more slides here. Did want to round out a couple more on the regulatory side. If you're involved in PFAS, the EPA did just lay out what they are looking to do, especially with the effluent limitations guidelines. I know the folks over at Bracewell are a great resource on this. If you're looking for more information on anything related to EPA and the Department of Energy, I encourage you reaching out to them and others, especially if you do have some of the forever chemicals. There also has been an update. New Mexico has some actions out there. I think they kept out fluoropolymers from their definition that was out in that state. Maine has been moving forward. Minnesota obviously still has theirs. Thought California had a hearing on April the 2nd. So there's a lot of action going on the PFAS space for those that want to be able to track that. And here the EPA administrator is giving you your roadmap. Thank you for sitting through regulations. We'll now get to trade and tariffs and where they are. And I'd welcome Paul or Caitlin to jump in anytime. I see you mute, and I'll pause right there as well, as there's a lot of action this week in particular. We were literally walking around the Hill on our flying day Wednesday, staring at our phones, trying to read some of the executive orders that the president had just put out affecting your industry. Just to put it in perspective, we now have a visual that shows you here the emergency declarations by the president. This is under the IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, that the president has used to impose tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, and then also across the board that 10% tariff on all partners that are currently in place. So this is where you can see that the emergency declarations are continuing and ongoing. That's out there. We do have multiple court challenges. The tell that we would like, and maybe Paul, you can jump in here in about 10 seconds on these court challenges. The way I would suggest to do, not a lawyer, would suggest to follow this, if a Democrat attorney general is the one that's pushing this forward, I probably wouldn't give that as much credibility, Paul, as I would the one that's being petitioned and put out there by a small business organization.
Yeah, I agree. And I have some familiarity with the latest one that was filed this week because he's a former client of mine. I worked not on tariff issues, I worked on product safety issues with him. It's a guy out of Chicago who does educational toys. And I'm only I'm pointing it out because of two things. One, the suit was brought by Aiken Gump, which is a major law firm in DC. And as you know, there's been several executive orders targeting major law firms, which has kind of made them a little shy. So the fact that Aiken Gump has taken this on, and also that this particular manufacturer, his name is Rick Woldenberg. If you turn on the TV and they're talking about court cases, he will be on because he is on multiple times a day on all the cable channels. It's not shy, not afraid. So it'll be interesting to watch that one. And it's, we've talked about it, Omar, before, that, the 232 court cases, that they want to not going anywhere. I did talk to Rick, and, they're a little bit, they do point out this is very different with the IEEPA tariffs, but the process has to play out. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. And watch that closely, because under the authority, it's not actually written that under IEEPA, the president has the authority to be able to move forward with these, to use tariffs, use IEEPA rather, for these tariffs. And that's why this is an important test. Whereas under the 232 cases, the Supreme Court has already come in and said that, no, he does have the authority to do that. And so that's why we're looking at that closely. A few other things here on the steel and aluminum side. Speaking of 232 tariffs, we do have, the president has now given us our process by which they are looking to expand that. What they are looking at doing is, starting yesterday, May the 1st, there is a process by which you can submit to the federal government a request to expand the steel and aluminum tariffs beyond the existing derivatives list. For your edification here, the president, starting on March 12th, began imposing tariffs of 25% on steel and aluminum imports coming into the United States. He also added 167 steel derivatives, meaning products made out of steel, to that list, and 123 articles of aluminum, derivatives of aluminum, to that list that were eligible for the 25% starting on March the 12th. Groups such as yourselves have said you can't just tariff the metal and think we're going to remain globally competitive, so the president agreed to create a process. That process is now open. There is going to be a window that is going to be a 2-week window that is open 3 times annually. That process that opened yesterday is going to be open for 14 days. This first window began on May the 1st. The second window will come up in September, and then we'll hit a true cycle starting in January and continuing around through the calendar year. What this process will entail, there'll be a 14-day window for you to submit, and then they will close. Once that window closes, the public will have a 14-day review period. The process calls for a 60-day response. We're going to get into some of the details on what this is. It's not a portal like the exclusion process was. You'll notice here that it says bis.doc.gov. That's the Bureau of Industry and Security. It's an agency within the Department of Commerce. However, where you submit this is going to be to BIS, but most of it's going to be done through regulations.gov, which is the main portal the department uses. It's important they're using regs.gov, and they're not using the old internal exclusion process that the Commerce Department had that has been dismantled and shut down effective February the 12th. So this is not an exclusion process to remove products from tariffs. It's an inclusion process to expand the current program for tariffs of 25% on steel and aluminum to add them to additional goods that are on there. This is the 232 inclusion process. At the bottom, you'll find a link to the full Federal Register notice, which went, that actually, we'll see, because it actually did go live today. We got the initial one of it on Tuesday, the 29th. So this will reflect the 29th, but it's the same as what they posted today. You'll notice that this inclusion process shall be moved forward. This says no later than the 10th. They've already got it up and running. So that tells you how quickly that they're moving on there. It's now open on May 1, 2-week submission window. There's where it has to go. Defense Industrial Based Programs at BIS is the email. An explanation of why the article is a steel or aluminum derivative. That's pretty easy for you all to do. Then you've got to put in the information on total value of the article steel or aluminum content as the share of the total value. That you've already received some CBP guidance, and you would find that under last month's monthly webinar, and you'll get that information there. Then you can look on statistics. They want all this information in here, description, to what extent the imports derivative articles threaten to impair national security. These are all part of those requirements that are in here with that 60-day timeline for processing those requests that are out there. This is where we will warn you. If a product is added to any 232 list, then the China tariff of 125% no longer applies. Therefore, if you go into this and submit a request to add this product to the tariff, it will remove the 125% tariff for everybody on that import coming in from China. That is very significant, as in extremely significant. You are swapping out a China tariff of up to 170% for potentially a ceiling of 70%, or even lower of 45%, if you were to do this, if somebody were to go in and do so. However, this 232 applies globally. So if someone does go in and the process goes forward and you are approved and the tariff applies, then that tariff will apply to the import of that tooling or that stamping or that product coming in from Korea, from India, from everywhere. This would be a global tariff. That's why it's important for companies to understand that this 232 action will cancel out 125% on China. 232 auto and parts tariffs. Those are now coming up and starting effective tonight at 12:01 a.m. This was announced already, and we've previously discussed it in the past. These are the automotive parts that applies to all countries, including Canada, Mexico, and is also done under the 232 action. Since we reviewed this last month, We're going to skip this slide, but get into the guidance that was just released 3 days ago by the Customs and Border Protection. The automotive parts tariff guidance has come out, and they do clarify what is subject to that 25% tariffs on the light trucks, minivans, crossovers, sedans, all these passenger vehicles that are included, and then they will go into the actual HTS codes, and you'll see it's at 25%, and on that previous screen we gave you examples of the HTS codes that are currently covered. Those products that are currently covered means that the tariff on those parts will go into effect tonight at 12:01 a.m. unless they are compliant and entering the United States under the U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement. The USMCA, if you're coming in as certified country of origin from there, then you do not have the tariff of 25% that are applying there. You can see there, it's a 0% tariff rate that is there as well. When we are looking at some of the other areas of parts of not of passenger vehicles, but still of heavy duty trucks and medium duty, we will get to that in a few slides when you look at that area. They are looking at an easing for the OEMs of some of the tariffs, and this was the tariff relief that was provided earlier. And among the next slide that we'll get to in a second here, but you can receive an import adjustment offset to that 25% tariff if you're an auto OEM, if you've got certain automotive parts that are being imported for final assembly into the US, and they allow a certain percentage of value, and this is going to be less on you all, but more on the OEMs to look at their calculations. But this is the critical one, the relief that the OEMs sought and did receive, and also the tier ones that do import receive this relief. The tariffs are not stackable for Canada and Mexico. This means if there is a 232 tariff on imported steel from Canada or Mexico, then you do not also add on to it the 232 tariff on the automotive part. It's going to be an or, not an and in that instance. So they are not stackable for Canada and Mexico for the 25% IEEPA or the 10% in case of aluminum from Canada, but they are still stackable for China. They are very clear that they are still stackable in the order that was put out by the White House for China for the 301s, the IEEPAs, and the 232. So please do note that as well. The stackable Canada and Mexico is right here is refund eligible, and they did clarify that this order is retroactive to March the 4th. We did get a question that came in that the US, Mexico, Canada exclusion on 232 automotive tariffs and parts is temporary correct. When do we expect that to expire? That is correct. In our last month's slide deck, we included the language that says as of now that the parts that are coming in that are USMCA compliant are not subject to those tariffs. However, the language does say that they are to set up a process to determine the non-US content value of a USMCA product entering the country. They have not set up that process yet. Had one call and then one meeting this week. One person thought that it was, so people increasingly believe he's going to get to Canada and Mexico later in the summer was one more optimistic read. Another person was thinking it might be more later in the year. And then the indication from a person with whom some of you all met this week told us that the tell from that person was that the White House seems that the relief they've provided on the USMCA side seems to have settled things on the Canada and Mexico. So now this is just speculation to that questioner. I don't know that they're necessarily now in a rush to go ahead and start imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Kerry's coming to town from Canada next Thursday to talk to Trump. So at least between now and then, we'll see where they end up going, but we do not have a tell yet of if and when they're going to do that. They seem to, now that the industry has settled down a little bit on the USMCA compliance and figured that out, I think they might be in a better place and not wanting to rock the boat, but that is a speculation and not necessarily informed. We want to run you through some of the 232s that are on here. Maybe just let me pause then and answer the Canada question that we received. Does it look like US and Canada will come to a trade agreement that will end the tariffs, specifically steel and aluminum tariffs? And that's an excellent question. And because you added that on, the answer is going to be more complicated. We do know that the president does believe in tariffs and does believe in tariffs on steel and aluminum in particular. The speculation would be to expect some relief on aluminum. We already saw that by their addition to the critical minerals list and therefore being subject to a 10% rate from Canada on aluminum and not for the full 25%. He's also included some stainless steel imports from Canada subject to a 10%, not 25%. So that might open the door a little bit there. But most of us believe that this is likely going to be tied up with the USMCA negotiations that by law have to be done by July of next year, but most of us believe are going to be initiated at some point this year. So those tariffs seem to likely be to remain in place until we get a little bit closer to that USMCA coming to fruition. So the discussions as well. We discussed the copper one last month a little bit as well. Again, with copper derivatives, we filed comments on that as one voice, raising some concern as the potential to impose tariffs on imports of copper that we just don't make in this country, and the copper derivatives that would include brass, bronze, nickel, and others. He's also launched one on critical minerals. Comments are due on May the 16th. Importantly, a derivative also includes semi-finished goods that include critical minerals, which could include motors, batteries, radar systems, turbines, and their components. Virtually everything includes a critical mineral. So this could potentially be another layer of tariffs. And keep in mind, the 232 tariffs right now are at 25%. TS Pharmaceuticals, those comments are coming up and due on May the 7th. We hear that the industry is looking to at least exempt generic drugs from it. Semiconductors, again, look what they wrote in the derivatives. Products that contain semiconductors. That is, again, virtually everything that's out there. Paul, if you want to jump in here, because there's a lot of these going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important for those of you on this webinar, obviously, it's very important to keep track of all these. On the semiconductor one, that could be huge. Omar rightly pointed out in the slide here that the downstream products that contain semiconductors is going to be massive, and those comments are coming up very quickly. I mean, you could see back in the original Section 232 steel and aluminum investigation in 2018, Omar, we had at least 60 days or something, 36 days to comment. The comment periods are getting shorter and shorter, so they really want to push these faster and faster.
Yeah, agree. And those of you that are staring at your phones, Wall Street Journal, News Alert, Beijing weighs fentanyl offer to U.S. to start the trade talks, just get something going. We'll see where that ends up heading. But I think, Paul, you nailed it right there. You look at heavy duty trucks, that process, the investigation was already initiated. And to Paul's excellent point, he's not waiting 270 days under the law, which is permitted to do these things. We're having comment periods of 14 days, 21 days, 26 days. They're moving extremely quickly here to cover a vast swath of the economy, especially the manufacturing sector in particular. As you look at the 26,001 pounds and up are the vehicles on the heavy duty and getting into those class 8s and going and going. So there's more tariffs coming potentially is the message from many of these slides. Timber and lumber, round those out as well. And effective today, the de minimis exemption for China and Hong Kong are now removed. That's when you're allowed to ship in a product of $800 or less without having to pay a tariff on it. That is now no longer in effect. In our more talkative presentations, we're explaining to folks that you're not only tariffing the product, you're not only tariffing the country, you're now also tariffing the mode of transport in the vessels. There's now a vessel fee that is going to be imposed starting in a few months in October, in the amount of $50 per net ton for vessel operators and vessel owners of China. They're also doing the same for the service fee on vessel operators of Chinese-built vessels. So that's how they get it for the Chinese-built, in addition to Chinese-owned and operated. And then on the automotive vessels and carriers, they're looking at a fee of $150 per car equivalent unit capacity entering the U.S. on a non-U.S. built vessel. So again, a number of tariffs to track that are out there. No shortages of issues there. And I think, Paul, we saw from our Hill meetings too, a lot of questions on steel and pricing. And I think this chart is really critical because we had some folks saying, no, steel pricing is going down, and we had to correct them on that.
Yes, we often point out the big issue is the difference between the steel prices in the U.S. and the world. Obviously, one thing that they attempted to address in the revision of the Section 232 tariffs is they were listening and have included this derivative product process. But the fact is that the difference between U.S. This is hot rolled steel, and this just came out today. It's Steel Benchmarker, and the difference in the price between the U.S. and China and the U.S. and Europe well, the U.S. and China price is $640, which is per ton, which is the biggest spread we've seen since January of 2024. And with Europe, it's hard to read there. It's 270, which is also the biggest spread we've seen since about that time too. So steel prices are going up, and the differences between the U.S. steel prices and global prices are widening. Thanks, Omar.
Thanks, Paul. We're going to wrap up in about 2 to 3 minutes. Please do type in your questions and we'll try to incorporate those and add those here in a minute. We saw a couple of more that have come in. We'll try to add those here and get to those here in a second. Some other numbers here. Durable goods manufacturers added 2,000 jobs. We included here fabricated metal product manufacturing added 3,100 jobs there in the latest report as well. On the machinery side, machine builders added 2,000 jobs. So when you see these numbers that say manufacturing lost 1,000, you got to break it down and look at durable goods and look at your industries and go beyond those on the job numbers that came out, as well as you can see down here on those numbers and where they are. Also, some things for you to take a look at later that we find interesting in some of our news feeds here. Mexico, Canada exposed on U.S. auto tariffs and some of those areas there as well. We had a couple of questions that did just come in that are somewhat relevant to this slide, so we'll just start answering here. Is it possible that we will see an injunction on the IEEPA Canada, Mexico, China tariff lawsuits in the month of May or June? That is a potential possibility that you might see that. It's going to come down to the courts. May seems a little bit quick because what this administration has been trying to do is they've been trying to consolidate all the different court challenges into one and move them up into New York to the Court of International Trade, which will be a little bit more favorable to the administration than, say, going to the Ninth Circuit out in San Francisco. And so you're going to see some procedural and legal maneuvering, but I don't want to, I'm already speculating. I think May would be too quick to see some kind of injunctive relief, particularly given that you've got this big date coming up on July the 9th. And that was another question that came up here. What are the key dates coming up on tariffs? You mentioned a few, but how are they stacking up over the coming year? And I'll keep answering questions while you all stare at and take a look at some of the trade data. This is from the WTO that shows that trade with China and the United States expected to drop by 77%. That's out there. But some of the key dates, and this ties back into the lawsuit, we have the president has a current 10% tariff rate on all imports from all countries except for Canada, Mexico, China. And that's going to convert back into the country-specific rates that average 23% at 12:01 a.m. on July the 10th. And in doing so, what impact is that going to have out there? And that I would be working my way backwards from July the 10th if I'm looking at it from a legal standpoint, as that's probably where a court's going to be saying, okay, you're under a 10% injury now, but we really need to be focused on when you get 46% on Vietnam and a few others that go in there. So those are going to be the next two dates I'm going to be looking at. Is going to be July the 9th, July the 10th. And if you're automotive, June the 24th is when the derivatives portal is expected to open, similar to the one that just opened right now on May the 1st as well. I mentioned additional 232 derivatives were added. Yes, we do have that list of steel and aluminum derivatives. You would have seen it in the February 28th or whatever that Friday was webinar. You can find that on onevoiceinfo.org under the webinar section. All of those are posted, and there'll be a link to that derivatives list. I think we posted it there, but you'll need your harmonized tariff schedule code to get that. We're happy to put that out there as well. We had a question that came out. What was the purpose of the executive order on apprenticeships? I'll come back to that as well as we round out. You see some other growth data here, other ways to stay connected with us as One Voice. We've got our webinars, we've got our podcasts, we've got our newsletters, we've got Monday calls that some of you jump on as well. There's no shortage of ways to find us and track and stay in touch, which obviously takes resources and need you to keep on doing that as well. A few things, the main purposes of the apprenticeships, where that is, it'll come in. It's basically they're trying to streamline and enhance the use of registered apprenticeship programs and try to get rid of some of the internal code word, the Inflation Reduction Act requirements that they don't want to see anymore, and then also get more companies to employ those as well. We had one question that came in. What is the outlook for timing of country tariff negotiations. I've just gave a presentation on that yesterday. We're putting them in buckets. The soonest bucket we have India goes first, we believe, based on conversations. South Korea will be second. Japan will be third. This can always change. The timeline for India could be a mini agreement and not a deal, but some kind of a mini framework. And that could be announced potentially as early as the fall. The challenge with full free trade agreements is they'll require an act of Congress, which is difficult to do and unlikely. And that's why we do think that some kind of announcement, and it would be a big win for Trump because he could help the farmers on this one. And that politically might help him with the Wall Street folks as well. So India is what we've been hearing as being the first, followed by South Korea, and then on to Japan. And then he might start getting into the others. We know the EU is starting to come to town, but until I see von der Leyen getting more directly involved, we don't know that necessarily it's going to be as active with the EU. Again, trade ministers coming over, but they still got a process there. Canada and Mexico, they should, now that Kerry's coming to town, they should start more significant dialogues and conversations, but probably in tranches. In the middle tranche, you're going to have Australia, the Israelis, Vietnam's got a lot of work to do on the China front for the US. But I do believe that the EU, Canada, Mexico, China are in their own bucket, and they will move on a different tranche than the rest of the countries that are out there as well. Somebody asked a specific question on aluminum. My customers are saying if a part is on an aluminum 232 derivative list, but part is made from steel, they don't have to levy the 25% 232 tariff at all because it is on the Annex 1 list, but there is no aluminum content. Is that interpretation correct? And that interpretation is correct. You can have a part with the same HTS code, but it is made out of steel, but it is not made out of aluminum. You are not the first person, and maybe you're giving me the same example as I've seen before, but yes, this example does exist where a part can be made with either steel or aluminum, but only the aluminum part is subject to the tariff. Be sure, please, to check whether or not it appears on Chapter 73 or 76, as the entire product would be subject to the tariff, as opposed to just the aluminum content within that. But yes, the interpretation is correct on that based on attorneys with whom we've spoken. Question, is there anything I can do to have our employee retention credit returns processed? I haven't seen anything from the Trump folks on this yet. They did just update on their 7A loan requirements. They're now requiring proof of citizenship, date of birth proof, and they had one other requirement on personal identifiers, but I haven't seen anything on the ERTC on that coming out from Treasury and the IRS. The IRS is going through their 5th interim or acting commissioner, Billy Long, the former congressman. His paperwork is in to the Senate Finance Committee. He was supposed to have a hearing next week, is my understanding, but I don't know that, and he's got tie-ups to ERTCs. I'll ask around on that. That's politically loaded given that Billy's coming in and he's got connections to it. But what you personally can do, I would suggest reach out to your senator if they're a Republican or they're a member of Congress and they're Republican close to Trump. I would look at that as an opportunity to reach out to move it along. Reach out to me and we might be able to put you in contact with somebody on that one as well. What is the current tariff percentage for metal stamping dies being sold to companies within Canada and Mexico? It's a vague question. If it's coming from China and it's being sold into Canada or Mexico, you're going to have to check what the tariff rate is on those countries for those specific products. In conversations with USTR on March the 2nd, USTR sent me the list of all the items that Mexico is currently subjecting to a tariff coming in from China, and they're looking to keep adding more products to those lists. So those are an active and ongoing issue through the U.S. negotiations, and also with the side of Canada, the U.S. is trying to get them tougher on the China side. But for metal stampings, if they were to come in from the United States to Canada, there are some stampings that are subject to a 25% on the retaliatory list. So I think I've answered 3 answers to that, but maybe not the underlying one there as well. But if you are talking about imports to Canada or Mexico, you're going to need to grab their HTS and their tariff list there as well. Any other questions going back through to see if I missed any that are on here? They stack up. Please type in any other questions, anything else that we might have missed. Any exemptions for imported tooling, tool holders, cutting tools that manufacturers use to produce their products. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce put out a letter yesterday and they put out several criteria they want the president to consider. One, if they're a small business, then they should receive exemption or favorable treatment. Two, if the product is not available in the United States or is not readily available, that's the language we helped work on. And then they had another one that's on there. I can't remember the third criteria for an exclusion. Basically, that's what you're getting at with your question. Is there going to be an exclusion process? And as of now, there still does not appear to be an exclusion process. Ron Johnson from Wisconsin has been meeting with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative to press on this fact. And at some point, they may open one up. But at this point, no, there is not a process or a portal to request a suspension of the tariffs on products. Right now, they're only looking at an inclusion process, not an exclusion process. Any other questions coming in? Sorry, we ran a little bit long. Somebody did. Is there an exemption for equipment for Petro? Right now, there is not an equipment exemption for, I shouldn't say for Petro. Let me go through my HTS in my head. I don't believe so on that side. You know what? I shouldn't say that. If you go back to our webinar again, this one would have been probably the March one. When they came out with the critical minerals list, there's a definition that Trump put out. And that critical minerals list probably does include some petrochemical HTS codes. And that means it'd be at a 10% rate coming in from Canada and not the full 25% on IEEPA. And the rest of the world, it would be just treated as a general product under that 10%. But note that there is a critical minerals 232 that's launched, and they may or may not include some of those products on that HTS list. So that one, I'd say there might already be an exemption, but it would not be a global exemption at this point. All right, this now officially is our longest webinar ever, folks. I appreciate your time and your patience today, sticking with us so long. As always, please feel free to reach out with us. Any questions that you've got, support your associations, and we will talk to you next month. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your weekend.